Welcome back to Diane Noah. If you're new here, this channel is where real events get broken down without the noise, without the spin, just the raw truth of what's happening in the world right now. And today's story is one that even seasoned analysts are struggling to keep up with. So take a breath, clear your head, and let's get into it. Iran's own state television confirmed it. Not Western media, not some intelligence leak. The regime's own broadcast mouthpiece went on air and admitted that at least 10 of their internal checkpoints had been completely destroyed. That is not a small detail buried in a news report. That is the sound of a 40-year system beginning to crack from the inside out. Because the war is no longer where wars are supposed to be fought, in open deserts, along fortified borders, or in contested airspace above military bases far from the civilian population. The war has moved into the streets of Tehran, the capital city, the very heart of the Islamic Republic. Israeli and American kamikaze drones have been appearing in the skies above Tehran, and they are doing something no outside force has ever dared to attempt in 4 decades. They are systematically dismantling the regime's internal security apparatus, checkpoint by checkpoint, barricade by barricade, position by position. Stop and think about what that actually means. The Revolutionary Guards and besieged militias had established checkpoints in every corner of Tehran. Sandbags stacked high, heavy weapons aimed outward, barrels pointed directly at the civilians. Those checkpoints were supposedly there to protect. For 40 years, those structures were untouchable. Ordinary Iranians had to pass through them with their heads down, their documents out, their voices low. Those checkpoints were the most visible, most daily symbol of the regime's absolute control. No one questioned them, no one could, and now, one by one, they are turning into fireballs, and the regime cannot hide it, not this time. Iranian state television was forced to admit, live, on air, that at least 10 checkpoints in Tehran had been completely destroyed, not damaged, not disrupted, blown up. And beyond Tehran, more locations across the country were also targeted. When a government's own media apparatus is forced to announce its own losses on national television, you are not watching a military setback. You are watching a confession of collapse coming straight from the regime's own mouth. This is not enemy propaganda. This is the regime's own voice declaring that the structure built to keep 88 million people under control is being hunted down in its own capital. The regime's executioners, the very people who carried out the January 2026 massacres, are now being targeted in the streets they once owned. Now, let's understand how we actually arrived here, because this did not happen overnight. From February 28th through March 10th, the United States and Israel conducted a coordinated campaign against Iran's conventional military infrastructure, missile bases, underground bunkers, airports, oil refineries, command and control centers, classic military targets designed to eliminate Iran's offensive capabilities and dismantle the tools Tehran used to project power across the region. In just 10 days, over 3,000 strategic targets were leveled. Iran's air defense networks, early warning radars, and missile batteries were completely wiped out. The skies over Tehran became an open highway with no one left to guard them. During those same 10 days, the regime's leadership structure began to fracture in ways it could not recover from. Calm died, creating a power vacuum at the very top of the chain of command. Over 50 Iranian generals were eliminated. Mojtaba Khamenei lacks the legitimacy to fill that vacuum, and with 88 million people watching from inside the country, the regime understood something with sudden and terrifying clarity. The greatest threat it faced was not coming from the sky, it was coming from the streets below. So, in a moment of cornered desperation, the regime made a decision. It abandoned its military bases and spread its forces into the civilian population. It pushed the Revolutionary Guards and besieged militia members into the streets of Tehran, into schools, into mosques, and established hundreds of checkpoints across the city. The strategy had 3 distinct purposes. First, to prevent any organized uprising from gaining momentum. Second, to stop an exodus, to physically keep the population inside and under watch. And third, to maintain the illusion that the regime still existed, still held power, still controlled the country. They feared the people inside those borders far more than the missiles falling from the sky. That fear, written into every sandbag and every barrel aimed at a civilian, is the key to understanding everything that happened next. Because starting March 10th through the 11th, everything changed. The United States and Israeli Air Forces shifted their targeting framework entirely. No longer focused on Iran's military capability, they began targeting the mechanisms the regime uses to control its own population: besieged checkpoints, internal security headquarters, patrol vehicles on city streets, data centers running the financial backbone of the regime's operational apparatus. This was no longer a campaign about military defeat. This was about destroying the regime's ability to survive internally, cutting off the system that kept the machinery of oppression functioning. And to do it without reducing Tehran to rubble, they deployed loitering munitions, kamikaze drones, not the massive bombs dropped from altitude that destroy entire city blocks. Surgical tools, smart, quiet, patient weapons capable of hovering in the sky for hours, completely silent, completely unseen from the ground, waiting for the exact right moment. Here is how this works in practice, and this is important to understand. Picture a drone circling silently high above a street in Tehran. Below, a besieged militia member has established a checkpoint, sandbags, a weapon, a vehicle, civilians moving through. The drone watches, it waits, it monitors civilian movement through thermal imaging, and then that critical window, the moment when no civilian is present, when only the militia members are gathered, the drone strikes. One precise explosion, a fireball, the checkpoint is erased. The civilians nearby are unharmed. These drones cost $20,000 each, not 20 million, 20,000. And they have completely dismantled the regime's human shield strategy, the strategy that kept the regime safe for years. The logic of the human shield only works when your enemy cannot wait. These drones can wait for hours. The moment the shield steps aside, they strike. Now here is the first question I want to put to you. And I mean this genuinely, because this is exactly what I want this community talking about. Do you believe that the destruction of these checkpoints represents a real turning point for the Iranian people, a moment that genuinely shifts the balance of power? Or do you think the regime is simply adapting, going underground, and waiting to reassert itself once the pressure eases? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them. And on a topic like this, your perspective matters more than you might think. Back to the battlefield, because the drone campaign is only part of the story. With Tehran's airspace wide open and Iran's radar systems completely dark, Allied forces are not limited to drones. According to reports now circulating among officials and analysts, the United States is evaluating the deployment of A-10 Warthog attack aircraft directly into Iranian territory. And if that decision is made, the scale of this conflict changes in ways that are difficult to fully calculate. The A-10 Warthog was designed with one purpose: to annihilate ground forces. Its primary weapon is a 30mm GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, a weapon that fires 3,900 rounds per minute and cuts through armored vehicles the way a blade cuts through paper. Built to hunt tanks, destroy convoys, and tear apart entrenched infantry in open terrain. The airframe itself was engineered entirely around the gun. The A-10 is not an airplane that happens to carry a cannon. It is a cannon that was given an airplane to move it around the battlefield. By March 12th, A-10s had already seen action in Iraq. In Mosul and Baghdad, the headquarters, armored vehicles, and ammunition depots of Iranian-backed militias were reduced to rubble within hours. The effect was total. But deploying the A-10 directly inside Iran comes with real complications. The aircraft is slow. It operates at low altitude. That profile makes it susceptible to shoulder-fired man-pad missiles, weapons that can be launched from a pickup truck in under 30 seconds. Iran has reportedly distributed 358 loitering surface-to-air missiles to its militia forces, and a single successful hit could bring down an aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars. Beyond that, besieged militia forces are not concentrated in open terrain. They are embedded within civilian neighborhoods, constantly moving, constantly blending into the population. This is precisely where the combination of platforms becomes overwhelming. Drones perform the surgical urban work, the scalpel, patient and precise, hunting checkpoints and individual targets in dense civilian environments. The A-10 is the sledgehammer, built to destroy massed positions, armored columns, and supply lines in open terrain where no precision instrument is needed. If both platforms operate together, the result is total systemic coverage. Every urban checkpoint falls to a drone. Every open terrain force falls to the warthog. There is no location that offers safety. There is no direction in which to withdraw. For the regime's ground forces, that is not a setback. That is an end state. But beneath the tactical picture, something else is happening that matters just as much as the weapons. What corrodes a military force from within is never solely the enemy's firepower. It is the betrayal of its own leadership. While militia members on the streets of Tehran are dying or discarding their uniforms and disappearing into the civilian population, the generals who issued their orders have gone somewhere else entirely. Recent intelligence confirms that Iranian commanders, the same officers whose headquarters have already been struck from the air, are now hiding inside civilian hospitals. They have relocated their command functions to facilities where sick and wounded civilians are being treated, using those people as living shields. Not to protect a military position, not to hold a strategic objective, to preserve their own lives. This is not a tactical retreat. This is a mafia fleeing into the walls when the authorities kick the door in. Men on the streets dying without orders. Men who should give those orders hiding behind hospital beds. The chain of command has been severed. The system that held an entire nation hostage for 4 decades is consuming itself from the top down, and the panic is no longer contained within Iran's borders. The FBI issued a formal warning to California officials and Governor Gavin Newsom, flagging specific concerns about potential IRGC-supported drone or maritime asymmetric attacks against targets on the United States West Coast. The possibility that the regime might attempt a strike on American soil, routed through commercially disguised vessels, was taken seriously enough to warrant official public statements and the activation of dedicated coordination centers. The governor's own words in the aftermath captured exactly how far this conflict had traveled from the Middle East into the daily security calculus of American officials. A state operations center established specifically after the war began was already running, coordinating information between federal and local authorities about what the regime might attempt next. This is what the final doctrine of a collapsing regime looks like. If I go down, I will take the world with me. And that doctrine explains everything about what Iran has been doing beyond its own borders. Without any coherent military logic, Iran began striking international commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf, oil storage facilities in Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates, the port of Salalah in Oman, not military installations, civilian energy infrastructure, the ports and fuel systems that keep the global economy moving. Shahed suicide drones were launched against these targets. Chinese sailors moving through the Gulf captured the moment Patriot air defense systems attempted to intercept Iranian missiles overhead. Those drones arced past a civilian Chinese cargo vessel and turned the fuel tanks at Salalah into a burning mass of destruction visible for miles. But the most revealing detail in all of this, the one that tells you exactly how far the regime's judgment has deteriorated, is this. Among the vessels struck by Iranian drones was an oil tanker belonging to Iraq. Iraq, a country long considered one of Iran's closest regional partners, a tanker sailing in Iranian territorial waters. The regime struck its own ally's ship, not by accident, but as a consequence of targeting processes so degraded that no one in the chain was capable of preventing it. The regime's logic, such as it is, follows a recognizable pattern. By striking regional infrastructure and dragging Arab neighbors into the conflict, Tehran hopes to regionalize the war, to force the United States to distribute attention across multiple fronts simultaneously and buy time for internal regrouping, a last resort attempt to survive through chaos when survival through strength is no longer possible, but it is the final calculation of a bankrupt mindset. Attacking neutral vessels and the infrastructure of neighbors builds a wider coalition of parties who now have direct material reasons to see the regime's operations ended, and it does nothing to stop the checkpoints burning in Tehran. Here is the second question I want to leave with you today, and this one goes beyond military analysis into something more human. Looking at everything unfolding right now, the checkpoints destroyed, the generals hiding in hospitals, the regime's own television announcing its defeats, do you believe the people of Iran are approaching a moment where open uprising becomes truly possible? Or do you think 40 years of systematic fear and violence has left a wound too deep to overcome, even now? Leave your answer below. Respond to someone else's comment if one is already there. This is exactly the kind of conversation this community exists to have. What is happening in Tehran right now is not a routine military operation. It is the collapse of a 40-year system of organized oppression, drowning slowly inside the very network of violence it spent decades building to protect itself. This regime built its authority on fear. It beat unarmed women in the middle of the street. It hanged young people from cranes for the public to see. It shot protesters during the Masa Amini uprising in 2022. It carried out a massacre of civilians in January of 2026. And behind all of it, backing every act of violence, was the visible physical presence of those checkpoints on every street, in every neighborhood, in every city. Sandbags, weapons, barrels pointed at ordinary people going about their lives. For 40 years, no one challenged those checkpoints, because no one could. Now faced with a military force that does not flinch, those checkpoints are turning to ash in seconds. The militia members who manned them, who harassed and searched and intimidated the civilians who passed through, are now small white pixels on a thermal screen, running in panic from a weapon they cannot see and cannot stop. And the regime's own television is forced to say it out loud. Every checkpoint burning in Tehran is not merely a military target that has been struck. It is proof that the thing which seemed permanent, inevitable, and undefeatable was, underneath everything, fragile. Every militia member throwing his uniform in a trash can and disappearing into the crowd is a man who has decided, with his body if not his words, that the side he served has already lost. Generals are in hiding. Fighters are abandoning their posts. The financial infrastructure that paid their salaries has been targeted. The regime is striking the ships of its own allies out of strategic blindness, and the United States is evaluating whether to put A-10 warthogs into the field inside Iran. If that decision is made, there will be nowhere left for the regime's ground forces to go, not in the cities where drones wait overhead, and not in open terrain where the Warthog's cannon finds every convoy and every position that dares to move. Every flame rising from a checkpoint in Tehran is a signal, written in fire, being read by 88 million people watching from their apartments, from behind curtained windows, from rooftops where they have stood for years under the shadow of those same checkpoints. The regime's confession, broadcast on its own screens in its own voice, that its checkpoints are being destroyed is not just news. It is the opening line of an ending 40 years in the making. The war has left the front lines. It has left the deserts and the borders. It is now in the capital, in the streets, in the heart of the structure that has held this country by force for 4 decades. And the regime has no answer, because the people who would give that answer are either dead, underground, or standing in a hospital corridor, hoping the walls around them hold for one more day. That is where this story is right now, and it is not finished. If you want to be here when the next chapter breaks, the most direct way is to be part of this channel. Hit the subscribe button just below and flip on the notification bell. That way, when a story this significant develops further, you'll already be inside the room when we start talking about it. And before you go, leave a comment. Tell me which of those two questions landed harder for you. Tell me what you think comes next. Tell me what I missed. The comment section on Diane Noah is where the real conversation happens. And today's story deserves exactly that. I'll see you in the next one.